Good afternoon. I'm Rob Weise. I'm with the Forest Lakes District, and we are in our town hall meeting this afternoon. We are grateful to be able to offer these town hall meetings once a week. And if you're tuning in live or you're watching this at a different time, we're thankful that we can offer these each week. We're excited this week to talk about the subject of mental health. And I'd like to start with a 2-minute video just to give us a bit of an understanding of what is going on, as if we don't know that already. But I think it's helpful in lieu of what's all happening out there, just to hear a little bit from Fox News.
80% of Americans are still living under stay-at-home orders. That might change with the president's new reopening, but it's meant to halt the spread of the virus, But the economic devastation being caused by these lockdowns may be creating a new pandemic, one of mass anxiety and helplessness.
I don't have any income coming in. I don't get any food stamps. So it's just hard to get, any help right now.
I have a 12-year-old son at home and stuff like that. And with the whole coronavirus going on, it makes me stress more. So when I stress more, I smoke more.
Because I'm pregnant with twins. If we were to get evicted, I don't know what we would do.
Now, this is heartbreaking, and you hear these stories all day long. Now we have 22 million people out of work, and millions of business owners are facing insolvency. So how many of our fellow Americans are feeling stressed and panicked like the women you just saw? Joining me now is Dr. Phil McGraw, psychologist, author, and host of Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, thanks so much for being on with us. I think this isn't part of the calculation of the bending the curve and all of those graphs that we see, and they're very interesting. And I'm not saying they're not important, but those comments aren't taken into consideration when we look at those graphs.
Well, and thank you for giving a voice to this, because it's so very important. This is invisible. I can't show you an x-ray of depression. I can't show you an x-ray of anxiety. But the fact of the matter is, the longer this lockdown goes on, the more vulnerable people get. And it's like there's a tipping point. There's a point at which people start having enough problems in lockdown that it will actually create more destruction and actually more death across time than the actual virus will itself.
Well, I think that helps set the tone a little bit for the mental health issues that we're facing and will be facing in the future. If you're just joining us, I'd ask you to make sure your name is up on the board on your screen, and also mute yourself so that we can keep the sound going well. I want to introduce our guests for today. Aaron King earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point in 2008 and his master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Bethel Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. In 2016, Aaron returned to Central Wisconsin and founded 180 Counseling Services to help teens and young adults process the changes taking place within their lives. Aaron approaches his work with clients from a family systems perspective, integrating cognitive behavior, narrative, strength-based, and solution-focused thinking into his work with them. He enjoys working with teens, families, and individuals who are struggling with emotional and behavioral challenges relative to anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, family conflict, change, addiction, and life transitions. We're also privileged to have Pastor Timmy Hanks. He's currently on staff with Calvary Community Church, an EFCA church in Williams Bay. Timmy has invited graduate school counseling intern Stephanie Klahorst to join us also today. He oversees the clinical supervision of counseling and social work interns there and serves as a multi-state licensed, both clinical and pastoral care provider whose continuity of care and core abilities include assessment, crisis intervention, consultative counseling, teaching, and systems interventions at a corporate, organization-wide, or health facility. He's established background in clinical psychotherapeutic counseling, there's a word for you, supervising and mentoring of post-grad level practitioners. He works in Wisconsin in conjunction with 4 different graduate schools. As a family therapist, he interacts with children, adolescents, families, and groups. Extensive social leadership experience in medical centers. I could go on and on. Timmy has served as a chaplain, medical center chaplain in pediatric and adult level 1 trauma centers in Chicago Illinois Madison. He's an active member of the GO team. And this is one of the reasons I had him here for the United States. He's been involved in the National Disaster Medical System that oversees clinical frontline force protection. So he's worked with the federal disasters, the Oklahoma City bombing, the World Trade Center 9/11, 9/11 that is, Hurricane Katrina and Rita, COVID, and he's also involved in Haiti and Nepal. He identifies, assesses, provides intervention, and advocates for the welfare of others. Thank you both for joining us as we discuss the subject of mental health during this crisis. Timmy, do you want to say something about your colleague Stephanie real quick?
Yeah, I'm privileged to have the opportunity to work with 2 grad schools in Illinois and 2 in Wisconsin. Stephanie comes from Concordia. She's actually finishing up her last hours in grad school and has done her practicum here and has done an excellent job. And we're hoping to lure her into her 3,000 clinical hours that is coming up next. But it's been a pleasure working with her. And with one of my other interns who's just finishing, Stephen, he's from Wheaton's graduate school. So it's great to have her aboard and to companion with her in the sessions where we see clients.
Well, excellent. We're going to jump in right away here. And our goal would be is we're going to ask some questions, get some interaction from the 2 of you. If any of you have comments or questions while we're discussing things, I'd like you to use the chat function and write your questions there or comments that we can use. We'll make sure that we have Timmy and Aaron's contact information afterwards in case you'd like to contact them. So let's jump in right away. And I know all of this brings stress and anxiety to pastors, church leaders. How do we manage everything is one of the big things that we're thinking about. And the first question I want to ask our panelists is, how can pastors and ministry leaders take care of themselves first during the COVID-19 crisis?
Do you care what order we go in, or?
Doesn't matter. Why don't we do that? Yeah, Aaron and Timmy, just jump back and forth. That'd be great.
Sure. Well, so I can jump off with this one. So it has been an incredibly trying time. Like our worlds have certainly been flipped upside down over the last 4 to 6 weeks, depending upon where you're at and what's all going on with that. So I think it's vitally important for ministry leaders at any level, but even within that pastoral level, to be able to take care of themselves in that. If you're not, or if they're not taking care of themselves, then it's going to be difficult to help others within their congregation or within that flock, right? The same would go for us, and I'm sure that Tim would agree with this. Like if I'm not in a good place emotionally, physically, it's going to be very hard for me to manage and maintain when people are contacting me and trying to process through what they have going on inside their own lives. One of the first recommendations I always make, and sometimes it's just the easiest things, right? But just being able to have that quiet time alone, be able to go out and go for a walk. If you have family at home, that's always useful that you're at least having other people around you. But even these type of dialogues and these type of conversations, being able to connect over Zoom or whatever teleconference you might use, if it's FaceTime or Skype or whatever, I think all of that becomes vitally important just to have connections with the outside world. If you're at home all the time or in your office all the time, those four walls can close in pretty quickly.
It looks like Timmy might have, yep, he just flew off. Stephanie, do you have an answer, thoughts from you on this?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I think one of the biggest concerns has definitely been the economic stressors. So, not being able to get out and talk to people is definitely part of the difficulty, but having those stressors underlying that. So it's kind of the combination of what they're seeing on the home front and then not having as many opportunities to talk about it with people as they normally would. So some of the normal coping skills are not there, and even just opportunities to have a 15-minute conversation on the phone with someone can be extremely helpful.
Thank you. Let's move to our next question. I think in that first question, there's maybe before we move to it, one of the concerns that I'm seeing personally is just there's so much that's on a pastor and ministry, their plate. And they've now had to take on 4 or 5 different roles. It's interesting, a lot of our youth pastors that I've been talking about, they become the sound experts or the online presence experts. So your job description has changed. And the problem is once we get into the next phase of this whole thing and we start seeing things different, I think people are tired. And so it's trying to help, how do we care for one another? And the second question has to do with their care. How does a ministry leader care for their elders and volunteer leaders? And thinking back to the first question, how are they taking care of themselves? And so part of that question is, how does that work together, and your advice on that?
Yeah, so, and that's a great point, Rob, of definitely in this time, wearing different hats or wearing more hats than certainly you were 4 weeks ago, or maybe even a couple weeks ago, especially as we see coming through one of the busiest seasons of the year within the church community, right? Like going through that Easter season, it wasn't so much keeping up with our normal tasks, but it also then becomes is how do we handle this new normal on really some of the busiest weeks of the entire year in terms of rolling out online platforms, trying to, one of the things I found really kind of intriguing over the course of that, and I watched a number of them, is just how churches needed to handle communion for probably the first time in their histories of having to do that electronically or online, right? So it's navigating out those new pieces, right? And there's a lot of stress that goes with that, because you certainly don't, and it's some of those things that we kind of put on ourselves, but we don't want to screw that up, like we don't want to make some big mistake or some error, and what can end up happening is we feel like the world gets put on our shoulders. And so there does have to be a certain piece of that where we have to take a step back and we need to say, okay, what needs to be done? Maybe we can even think of it as a bit of a triage type situation. What needs to be done? And what is the order in which we're going to do this list in? Certainly, all of the pieces become important, and they certainly each carry their own weight. So at a certain point, it becomes, how do we structure this as a church to make that work? Now, to that second question there, and saying, okay, where do we, not only are we maintaining as a church and as a church staff, right? So if you're senior pastor or executive pastor of a church, right, you have people underneath you, whether they're pastors or other pastors, or if it's administrative staff, things like that. But then that really branches out then of where you now have volunteers. So you may have volunteer leaders that have people underneath them. I think of, and just locally here at my church, right? I'm an usher here. So, to say here, there's, a chain of people above me, and how do we manage that? I think, and again, it might just sound basic, but one of the main pieces that I've personally found really kind of beneficial and enriching is maybe just a phone call. It doesn't have to be this deep therapeutic type moment, but sometimes it's just a matter of making a phone call and checking in for 15 or 20 minutes. And that doesn't necessarily need to fall on the pastor that oversees that ministry or fall on a senior pastor that's involved in that. It can simply follow, some key volunteers that you might have. I think that's the one thing that I've really seen, is that there's a lot of people that want to be used, like individuals within the congregations that want to be in a position where they feel like they're helping out in some way, especially during this time. And so sometimes it becomes just a matter of utilizing other volunteers, maybe we can call them, within your ministries and congregations, to say, hey, can you just call these 6 people this week, and just touch base with them and just see how they're doing. That becomes a positive for both of them, not only the person that's receiving the phone call, but also the person providing the phone call, because now they feel like they have purpose, and they're reaching out and providing support in some level, at least, to someone else within the congregation. So Sometimes this doesn't have to be this complicated type thing. It's just a matter of looking at it and saying, oh yeah, this person has a gift for, we'll say making phone calls or reaching out or for caring for others. We'll see if they want to call a couple of people within our congregation, maybe as ministry leaders or volunteers, just to see how everyone's doing.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Aaron. I think notes of affirmation, who's writing notes anymore? A handwritten note even? I mean, just dividing it up is so important and not trying to take it all on yourself. And I think that's the problem we sometimes do is that I'm going to do this all myself. So I think it's important for us to encourage others to be involved in this. Stephanie, any thoughts from you?
I think I would say one of the things that I've noticed being a challenge for leaders in the church is to be flexible and do things differently. I think we get stuck in our habits, our rituals of, okay, this is what a service looks like, and this is how I reach, my kids' Sunday school class or whatever, and just to be willing to be creative and think outside the box. And I think people appreciate that when we try to do things differently to match with what's happening at the time.
That's good. Well, Timmy Hanks is back with us. Timmy, don't you love technology? How it works when you want it to?
Yeah. No, and I got cut off where Aaron was sharing some stuff. For your first question, or are you moved on from there?
We're on to number 2, but they both are related. The first question has to do with how do we make sure pastors and ministry leaders take care of themselves, and then how can they then care for their elders and volunteer leaders? They kind of go together. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was close to my grandpa, and his name was Erich, the German spelling, E-R-I-C-H. So I'll use that as an acrostic. E is for encouragement, okay? Am I appreciating, reflecting? Is there some difference-making moments in the people that, whether it's my family, my friends, or some of the people that I'm shepherding? R is for my role as a friend. Am I supportive? Am I listening? Am I sharing? Is there empathy? Is there validation? Is there an affirmation of what's important? I is for, am I intentional in the depth of my questions? God's word, Galatians 6:2 says, share your burdens with one another. And so if I can ask, what is hard for you? What can I pray for? What might you be a little bit stuck in? And sometimes just a little bit of coaching on thoughts, feelings, or perceptions can be helpful, but the intentionality of your question is helpful. C would be, how are we connecting? Am I coming alongside? Can I check in? Can I reach out? Is there, whether that's through text, emails, writing letters, FaceTime calls, video conferencing, all the stuff that churches are using. And maybe am I even encouraging, hey, are there 2 or 3 people that this week we could partner together that you could match or connect with? And then lastly, H, is there a helpful part of intimacy that I can share, however brief that is, as a ministry of presence? Even if it's technology-wise, am I being with this person and not really doing? It's not so much about what can I do for you, it's about being able to connect with people, and that's more of a being with, as Jesus modeled throughout the Gospels. Those are all huge things, and I think if they're tiny little things in our own ways of, am I giving permissions? If that means I need a lazy day, am I doing self-care, the breaks, the time, the self-reflection? Am I drinking water, as my intern constantly reminds me? Because I have my coffee instead of my water, okay? But creativity, am I coloring? Am I writing? And am I projecting? Am I finding time in the Word? Job 38-40 is a wonderful place to get caught up in the imagery of what's in the Word there. Am I claiming His promises as a way of grounding myself? Joshua 1:9, Psalms 23, Psalm 56:3, Psalm 121. Those are all critical things that we can be doing.
Wow, I like that. I like that word that you gave to us, Timmy. That was great, because I need those kind of reminders in order to remember stuff. Marcus is taking notes for us, so we'll have this stuff in the notes for people. Let's go to question 3, and this is more of a general question. How do you think people are truly handling the COVID-19 crisis and social distancing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are your thoughts?
I'll dive in with just a couple of things from what I'm hearing. I'm part of the team that I'm on is in New York right now, and I've made it a point to touch base with them and seeing how they're doing. And they're working with the medical examiner's office, and they have some pretty tough stuff. And so they're holding their own traumas and griefs and stuff inside, but they know that it's important to process with people. And so that would be one extreme. A lot of the nurses that are on front line, the healthcare workers, respiratory therapists, people that are out there, boots on the ground doing stuff, they're going to need some TLC when they get through some of the stuff that they're doing right now. On the other end, we have people that are bored stiff, and they don't realize and appreciate the fact that they can maybe hunker down with family members or board games or whatever it is, and they're not really in any line of fire. So you've got both ends of the teeter-totter, so to speak. The people that are more at home, I think the number one thing that I'm hearing is don't spend too much time in media, because I don't want to knock any of the stations that are out there, but they all have an agenda, and you're going to hear stuff that sometimes is not helpful, particularly if you got little munchkins in the house. And it's a stressor just to sit with whatever the media is presenting on a daily basis. So I would limit your time listening to what they're calling news.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting. I work with primarily teenagers, and their families is primarily where I'm at, and it's been kind of an interesting dynamic, because when a lot of this stuff happened, there was a lot of excitement. I mean, it went right up. Like, school is canceled. Life is great. Like, we don't have to go to school anymore. Like, we're gonna do e-learning, and I can get through my whole day in like 2 hours, and then I can play video games for the rest, right? And so it started out as kind of the super high peak, and as it's kind of gone on, that started to drop. Last week, for example, I had 2 teens that I got in contact with that were experiencing some suicidal thoughts, where that the excitement of being home all the time has dwindled. Now I'm in central Wisconsin. I'm in Stevens Point, and so we haven't had nearly the impact in terms of cases or illnesses or certainly deaths. And so I think here what's developed out of that is people aren't taking it incredibly seriously. Like, there was a time when they were, but now I think it's kind of worn off, and especially with the teenagers that I work with, most of them, if not all of them, have resumed at least some level of social interactions with their friends. So they will be hanging out at night or whatever. I don't really know how I feel about that necessarily, but for a lot of them, I think that becomes a healthier place. At least they're having those interactions outside of, these are our parents that are making us do our homework all the time. I totally agree with what Tim said there. Social media, or I won't say social media, but that certainly contributes. For the large majority of the teens that I work with, they live on their phones or on their tablets, or they're watching TV. And I think that has become very detrimental. And I became very unpopular with the teenagers when I said to their parents, limit screen time, like limit their interactions, with what they're viewing. And I think it becomes more important then to be able to know, okay, when we're exposed to that, because they're going to be online, they're going to be on social media, are the resources credible that they're at least seeing? Is it some guy who's making a podcast in his basement, or is it coming from our leadership within the government? And so I think that becomes, and I totally echo what Tim said there. There's so much news that's floating around, news in quotations, and a lot of it is just based upon projections that come from someplace by someone. I remember initially, some of the initial projections were like 250,000 Americans were going to die from this. Well, now they've completely scaled that back, right? But at the onset, that's incredibly panic provoking. Like, we can't go see anybody, or we can't see grandma or grandpa, because if we're a carrier, we're going to kill them, you know, like, and so I think that certainly contributed on the front end with a lot of the fears. And from what I've seen, at least in my experience with working with the teenagers that I have, a lot of that's kind of melting away a little bit, just so that, you know, that they are going outside more and they're interacting with their friends a little bit more.
Stephanie, you want to add something? I have muted you guys when you're on just so we don't get any feedback. But Stephanie, you want to unmute yourself? Anything you want to say about what we just said?
I think the thing that I've noticed is people take a big personal responsibility on making sure that they don't accidentally pass it on to someone else. So even if I'm not personally concerned about, you know, oh, what if I catch it and what if this and what if that, if I'm hanging out with someone else and they are very concerned, I could inadvertently be causing additional stress for them if I'm not being careful. So just how important it is to communicate with people that you may be meeting up with, or you know, when you're at the store, just to keep in mind that communicating, you know, what your comfort level is, and then asking them what their comfort level is. And that's a big part of ministry too, I think, is, you know, we can offer things to people and see if they would find it encouraging, but if it's something that would stress them out, then it's not going to work. So just asking them what they're comfortable with us doing for them.
Very good. I'm going to move us to the next question, and it also, in our chat, we've had similar questions, but our number 4 question is, what advice would you give to pastors and ministry leaders as they care for the flock? And then I'm going to add to, we have one of our folks that's online with us said they're asking about just how do you minister to particular social and mental challenges faced by those living alone, included by mandate during this time. And so all the different aspects, single, married with kids. I mean, I talked to some youth pastors this morning that have small children. They are just extremely stressed out right now, because when you've got young kids, it just drives a lot different. You're working at home and dealing with all these things. So again, the question, what advice would you give to pastors and ministry leaders on caring for their flock, and especially some of these individual situations that they're having to deal with?
Start with, if I can give you 6 things real quick. One would be, am I praying for? Am I connected with, however that is? Am I encouraging? Am I exercising my faith in a way that I can relate it to the person? Am I stirring up the hope? And am I facilitating something in a way that's practical for them? So those are my 6, if you want to call them verbs, that are helpful.
Did you get those all, Marcus? Okay, great. I think those are excellent. You want to elaborate on any of those, Timmy?
Well, I think that the connection thing we've kind of covered, and whether it's old school with a letter in the mail or a phone call or technology, I think just a fresh touch, whether that's once a week or whatever that is, that's critical. The encouragement in the role of a leader or a good follower, a son or daughter of the king, am I encouraging that person? Maybe it's we're just telling a story of a game that I played Catan the other day and I lost, or whatever it is. Sometimes it doesn't have to be something critical. It's just having 15, 20-minute connection with somebody in a meaningful way. Am I exercising my faith? And sometimes the faith is how maybe the metaphors that I'm bringing to impact the other person, whether I'm going to take them to Mark 4:35, where Jesus is in the storm and he's out sailing at night with the boys, or Luke 22, I think it's verse 32, 33, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. I mean, that's a scary verse. And so we go through those dark places, those storms, those struggles in our lives. And if we pause long enough and say, what do you think God might be teaching you in this moment? And draw that person out. That's critical in helping them to have some stability, some grounding, some hope. And you're facilitating your relationship with the person. So as far as I'm concerned in this whole thing, relationship is one of the most significant things that we can be doing as believers. Whatever, if it's a shut-in or whether it's a staff in the office or whatever that might be.
Very good. Aaron, you have something to add to that?
I do. Well, it will dovetail with that. So when I mean, obviously we got the questions a bit in advance, right? So one of the things that I came up with, the first piece that I would kind of add on is just being able to say, can we find some peace in the storm, some calm in the storm, so to speak. This is an incredibly rare opportunity for us within our culture where we are forced to be quiet, right? Or we can be, at least. We're supposed to stay indoors. We're supposed to stay, relatively close to ourselves, really, in our immediate family. I think that opens the door for personal growth and personal development. It really does take that question of why is this happening, and it flips it a little bit to being able to say, okay, why is this happening? To okay, well, why is this happening? I can make that more internalized. I can say, okay, I am now forced to be at home, kind of having some of that quiet time to grow in my faith, grow in my just that experience or that knowledge that I can glean during this time where I don't have to go to work or I don't have to leave and be busy all the time with all the different things that are going on. Parents that I've worked with, right? This is the first time where they haven't been needing to be 4 nights a week at some sporting event for their child or for their children, right? They don't have practices. They don't have activities on the weekends. So this is that kind of a rare opportunity within our culture to say, look, we are going to be quiet internally, at least, and we can search through and we can find that. Now, what comes out of that hopefully becomes some level of hope, and that we're able to search for that hope, that we're able to find out of that peace coming this experience, even when there's a lot of things that look bleak and don't look great. So, the advice that I would give to pastors, ministry leaders, even parents that I work with is take advantage of this opportunity. Eventually this will end and you will go back to going 150 miles an hour where 4 nights a week you're at baseball practice, gymnastics, hockey, right? All these different things that are going on, followed by every weekend when you're on the road for some tournament. And so enjoy some of this, even though it's stressful because your kids don't leave. I absolutely agree. There is that situation where it is stressful being at home because everyone's at home and there's not a lot of quiet, right? Like physical quiet in that. So it's being able to carve out that time to be able to say, look, we're sitting down and doing this. But I think that it will just as we look as we're moving forward, that when we return to normal, and that may look different, right? But when we return to normal, these experiences may end with having that time just to say, look, we have downtime and peace and quiet. We don't like it because as a society we like being occupied and we like being busy, or that's at least what it's morphed into. But this is really a great opportunity to kind of really find yourself and if there has been a disconnect, to your faith or to the faith community, maybe in some respects, is being able to say, look, I'm sitting down and having these intimate times with God, because we have the time to do it.
Stephanie,
If there's one thing that I would add, I love practical things that can be put into place. And when you mentioned the different age groups and how we can be reaching them, I know there are a lot of people that don't have young kids and aren't working right now, and they have all this time on their hands. And so finding ways to mobilize the church body, because I know the pastors and the leadership are still just as busy, but a lot of other people aren't. And, options about how to make masks and sending that out to the congregation and seeing if people can do that. For the families that do have lots of kids, I'm sure they're looking for craft ideas. So if you have artsy people in your church, asking them to make videos and posting it online so parents have something to do with their kids, there's probably a lot more things that we can do to get the church body involved, so it's not just leadership doing everything and kind of delegating some of those things. The shut-ins are really struggling right now with not being able to have visitors, and there are probably lots of people in the church who aren't connected with those shut-ins, but they have time that they can make those phone calls now. So just some of those practical ways that you can have your church members get involved, I think.
Yeah, that's really, go
One
ahead.
thing I would, because this is for the youth pastors that might be in the room, or even kids ministry, things like that. One thing that I've started recommending is if there is a nursing home or an assisted living in the vicinity of where you're located at in your town or city. One thing that I've seen, because those individuals have been locked in some cases they can't even leave their rooms. They bring their meals to them. And so I think what can be really encouraging is if there's a partnership between your church or your youth group or your student ministries or children's ministries and one of those nursing homes, just to write letters where the kids are going stir crazy, and it can just be a matter of sitting down and with some paper and whatever. I don't know all the logistics of how that can always work, but I think then that serves a dual purpose of giving them something to do, and then also reaching out to some of those people that are trapped in a room, 24 hours a day, just kind of sitting there waiting for something to happen.
I think it's been interesting as I've dialogued. A friend of mine who's a ministry guy, he said, I don't like Monopoly. I don't like puzzles, honestly. But he said, this is the time that my kids are going to remember, just like a couple of you said, how important it is to figure out, let's not waste this time. I think it's so important. I think, Aaron, you alluded to that. And so I would just encourage us. The top concerns of COVID, I just recently heard this. Lifeway Research said, number one concern is staying connected. 30% say that. Number two is finances, 26%. Number three, they're concerned about technology. Number four, pastoral care from a distance. What does this look like? Number five, members with no technology. Like you said, shut-ins and people that just don't know it. Number six, uncertainty to what's the future look like. Seven, pressures surrounding not meeting together. This was just put on 4/17 by Lifeway Research, and I think it really shows there's just a lot of concerns. I want to transition us to our last couple of questions. We've got some folks that are asking questions on our chat, and we'll incorporate them too. But let's go a little bit farther in this whole thing and push. Okay, Timmy's back. I know your internet's in and out. Glad you're back. You didn't miss much. So what I'd like to talk about is, some people get so overwhelmed. Ministry leaders can't be the person that's going to take care of everything. And sometimes there's a point where we're overwhelmed and we go, this is out of my league. It's not my pay scale, we joke and say. But when is it right for us? And when would you recommend that someone refers someone to a professional? What does that look like? What level of involvement? Because, you meet with somebody and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this one is pretty big. I don't think I can handle this. How do you know how to identify that? What are your thoughts?
We all know what a diaper is, okay? So here's another one for you. So if you, DIAPERS, first of all, disoriented, dazed, feeling, memory loss, unable to give date, time, limited recall. Second letter I, inability to care for self. We in the counseling arena, we call it ADLs, activities of daily living, eating, bathing, changing clothes, those kinds of things. I don't mean taking out the garbage. I may not want to do that, okay? Anxiety would be the A. Increasingly on the edge, am I restless? Are my fears escalating? Am I spending more time in ruminations that are out of control? P, problematic use of alcohol, drugs, misuse of prescription drugs, those types of things. Next letter E is escalating depression. Pervasive feelings of sadness, aloneness. The fancy word would be called anhedonia. It means inability to have joy. R would be the next reference psychiatric symptomology. Aaron will tell you the same thing. If I'm hearing voices, if I'm seeing things that aren't really there, if I'm having delusional thoughts, those types of things. And then obviously, and he touched on it a little bit, suicidality. there's a hopelessness, there's a despair, there's poor impulse control, and then if we added in homicidality, in other words, I want to hurt someone or myself, those would be, and DIAPERS is a quick mnemonic to remember it. And then obviously, particularly with being cooped up in houses, if there's any domestic violence, child abuse or neglect, or in Wisconsin, elder abuse and neglect. So that's a quick way of maybe remembering the disorientation, inability to care for self, anxiety, problematic use of drugs, escalating depression, referencing psychiatric symptoms, or suicidality / homicidality.
Yeah, so I think that is. I don't know if I have a lot to add. I think that provides a lot of that insight. I think part of the struggle that a lot of you run into is that you certainly have more people that might be knocking on your door or calling you than what I do, right? Like there becomes this idea that you're my pastor, you should be able to talk to me whenever I need it. And so I think I'll just shift the question a little bit in the sense of, you know, how to handle that, right? Of being able to set boundaries so that when you get into that situation, and it will happen, where you feel like you have the weight of your entire congregation on your shoulders because people are calling you at 3 o'clock in the morning that are struggling with life, that is a phenomenal indicator to say, I'm in too deep with this and they need to, you know, talk to somebody else that can handle this in a way that can handle that, right? Yeah, I mean, I see with teenagers, usually it becomes the symptoms are things that are, what parents see is sometimes a lot of the symptoms of something greater, right? So it will be they're refusing to do their homework, or they have no desire to get up, or no motivation to go do that. And part of that, I think, is normal, because no one wants to do work when they really don't have to. But what becomes a greater issue to that is there an underlying reason to that? So I always tell parents, you know, like, just look at sleeping habits, look at eating habits. Like if they're not wanting to eat, if they're not wanting to sleep, or if they're sleeping all the time and eating all the time, those are some indicators to say there's something more going on under the surface. Are there big mood swings? Sometimes it's hard to tell with teenagers because there's sometimes a lot of mood swings and you just have to kind of ride it out. But sometimes then they will indicate things and they will say things, you know, they'll make comment about how, and they probably aren't this direct, but it'll be along the lines of where it'll be, there's not a lot of hope, or life just sucks all the time. And so those become indicators to say, wow, this is not just a normal, I'm having a bad day, or I'm having a bad week. Like this seems to be something much greater, because I can't get them out of bed, or they're up all night worrying about everything, right? Those become bigger indicators that would alert me, if I was in that situation, to say, okay, maybe this isn't just they're having a bad day and we can talk through it. It would just become a matter then of being able to know, okay, this is beyond my area of expertise, and I give all of you permission. You don't have to put on all the backpacks. Like you don't have to carry the weight of everybody that's coming to you to talk. It's perfectly okay to say, we need to spread this out a little bit, and if it's one of those extreme measures, we need to bring some other people in to get their opinions or feedback.
I would say too, if you've had repeated interactions with someone in your congregation and you know they're stressed, of course things are stressful right now, but if their mood seems to be going downhill, not just staying stressed, but getting worse each time you speak with them, you know, as great as pastoral intervention is, it looks like it may need to get bumped up to the next level.
Very good. Well, I'll never look at the word diapers the same way, Timmy. That was good. Let's go to our last question, and then I want to open it up for some Q&A. But what do you think will be, what will we see in the future because of this time of social distancing? One of our folks on the call here is asking, the longer this goes, do you think people are using the time well? And what do you see in the future because of this? And do you think that society and the norms are going to be different? So incorporate this all. What do you think this is going to do to the future for people, and how are we going to handle this all?
Sure. So I'm not quite sure that I'm worried about the future. You know, the rapture can happen yet as soon as this call is over. For me, it's unpredictable. You even have government agencies arguing amongst themselves. We ran out of this, we don't have that, and you know, the death number is this, and it's all these things that there's not a concentrated effort from at least what I'm hearing to let's move forward together. There's more arguing and infighting than progress being made. So from a secular angle, I don't think much of that is going to change. That's just the way it is. And in this world, we will have those problems. But as believers, as Aaron already said, this is a great opportunity to, whether it's family time or reaching out or making differences in small ways, to begin to come up with what I'm going to call our new normal. Because getting back to the way it was is, I'm not interested. I'm more interested in what can we do to impact relationally those people that we have the privilege of caring for as part of shepherding the flock. Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a mental health clinician, whether you're a son or daughter of the king just trying to make a difference in your neighborhood because maybe you went out of your way to, hey, my neighbor's daughter turned 3 the other day, and he went out and said, please honk your horn 3 times so she knows that we're selling. And I mean, it was unbelievable. There was like 100 cars going by, and I live out in the boondocks, so 100 cars is a big deal. But it's those difference-making things where people can appreciate some normalcy, the values of what they appreciate in connecting relationally. I think we're all going to get better at technology, even though I think I've bombed out here 4 times now. I've actually changed offices, so this one seems to be working better.
Aaron, what do you think?
Well, one of the things I hope changes or continues is I hope that this allows us, all of us, to have greater amounts of empathy and greater amounts of compassion. We've all been kind of cooped up. We've all been in that situation where it has been less than fun. And my hope is that once this is over, that we can have that understanding that we can understand each other's hurts and pains and discomforts a little bit more, and kind of on top of that, of being able to say, look, I understand, like I remember what it was like to have those feelings of isolation or those feelings of concern or fear. I can understand that now in a way that doesn't mean that they have to solve my problems, but that means that somebody else can hear me and can maybe relate to what I experienced or what I kind of went through in that. So I hope that as we come out of this time, whether it's in a month or it's in 6 months or whenever it ends up being, that we are able as a society to have some more compassion and empathy for our fellow human beings, in specifically even within the church, right? Where we can walk into church on a Sunday or whenever we're going there, and we're able to see people and we can connect with them a little bit more than what we'd seen before. Society as a whole, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. The future itself, hopefully as a society, we can learn to not take things for granted as much as what we have. We've certainly, even the smallest things, right? From running out of toilet paper, right? Like, I mean, just going weeks and months without having, you know, packs of toilet paper on the shelf, right? That certainly, hopefully as a society, we can walk away from that, and we're able to say, look, even that small thing, I am very thankful and grateful for. And I hope that as a culture and as a society, we can turn that, and we're able to say, we're more grateful and we're more compassionate than what we were on the front end.
It sounds like the question was almost, you know, what if the world looks different when this is over? And there's a very good chance that the world will look different. There will be, you know, good things that come out of this and a new set of problems that come out of this. And if leaders in the church or members of the congregation are worried about those things, I think there's no better time to focus on that this world is not our home. There will always be problems. They might be a new set of problems, but it's a good reminder that we're not staying here, and we need to use this time wisely.
Excellent. We've got a couple questions here. We've got just under 10 minutes left here, and so I want to jump to a couple questions we've had. One person asked, my assumption is that the pornography industry is booming right now. I'm wondering if there's a creative way we can help people resist this temptation, or how we can be prepared for the aftermath as people emerge from isolation with deeply entrenched addictions, idolatry patterns, and I'm going to add, or the quarantine 15 we've been hearing about. Have you guys heard about that? 15 pounds. So what are your thoughts about addictions? Say that again.
You're going to need more than 8 minutes for addictions. I already had 2 people this morning with addictive issues, and one of them happened to be the thing you mentioned. So I mean, Satan's getting a foothold, and it's going to take a community to be able to come alongside and to push back on that. And, you know, I don't know that the 7 minutes you have left, you want to get off into an addictive area. It's the dark kingdom. And as we partner together and push back the darkness, whether it's drinking, whether it's gambling, whether it's, you know, pornography, for me, I have to give my credit card to my sister. So when I go in Barnes and Nobles, I don't come out with 10 bucks. So.
That's a good point, Timmy. Aaron, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so it is a growing problem. I have seen, well, it's been a problem. I think this just provides more free time to indulge in some of those behaviors. And certainly industries are taking advantage of this. There's some websites that are offering free premium services while the quarantine is happening. The only purpose for that is to get people hooked even further than what they were before, right? And to generate more revenue for them when this is over. One thing I would recommend, I certainly don't shy away from it. I work with predominantly teenage guys, right? So I certainly don't shy away from it. I would encourage all of you to not shy away from it either. Don't be afraid to ask those hard questions. Don't be afraid to bring up a topic. One of the things I've seen is some churches have been sending out like communications, right? They'll send out emails once a week or something like that. My encouragement would be, as a millennial and as somebody that kind of is in you know, has been around quite a bit, don't shy away from talking about some of these issues, even if it feels awkward, confusing, or whatever. It's okay to give our position on certain issues, you know, a faith-based perspective on some of these issues. And more than anything, I think it can open the door to better conversations with most addictions. And I'm sure Tim would agree with this. With most addictions, the power in that lies in the secrecy of it. I can access anything I want in the middle of the night, or I can have a bottle in my refrigerator that I can go whenever I need, and nobody needs to know. And so I think the more that we can put light on a situation as a church, doesn't mean that we have to tell people how to live their lives, or, you know, what we need to do with that, because that always becomes the pushback is, you know, don't tell me how to live. but I think the more that we can at least be open to dialogue surrounding that, or at least bring it front and center so that people recognize this is not just a issue of boredom, like that these things have far-reaching consequences that we might not see today, but we may 6 months from now and say, my goodness, why did I give into all of that, back in April? I think it's just super helpful if we can ask the questions and engage in the dialogue.
I don't know if anyone else has been engaging in as much self-reflection as I have during this time, but I'm learning things about myself that I did not realize. And I'm sure there are many people who, yes, are going to fall into things that they didn't know were a temptation for them. But I'm going to be a diehard optimistic here and say that, sometimes it takes a realization of how sinful we are before there can be a revival. So I think this can be a really exciting time for people if they're willing to admit to things that maybe before now they weren't willing to admit to.
Wow, that's really good. That's insightful. We have one last question, and then I want to give each of our panelists one last shot to give us some of their wisdom. But the last question, we have someone who asked, can you share about manipulative personality disorder and recognizing this in individuals? It's been my experience that as individuals will burn a pastor counselor out quickly. And so I know there's some long answers to this, Timmy, I'm sure that you would have to give, but just your thoughts. And I think part of this has to do with when to identify, should we refer someone? And that's hard sometimes because people come to pastors and ministry leaders for free counseling, honestly.
I would say probably the top couple of things is if the person is clueless to what a boundary means or disrespects the boundary that you have. Secondly, is clearly not owning or taking responsibility for issues and therefore projecting them onto yourself, the shoulds, whether that's in aggressive way or passive aggressive way. There's two basic types of manipulation. Again, you could have a whole hour on this, but I think the key pieces would be the boundary issues. And usually we have a thing in our office here we call FOOPOO, family of origin poo. So if I've learned in dysfunctional family growing up that a lot of things, I can't speak truth, I gotta hide stuff, the expectations that are there for me, I'm not meeting them, I can't share my feelings. Chances are, if you know a little bit about somebody's background, chances are your guess is going to be, you know what, they're doing the best they can, but nobody's ever paused them to say, hey, let's really talk about what would be helpful here. So Aaron can jump in on that, but yeah, I mean, we're trying to keep it simple. That's a loaded question.
Well, I agree with you completely. Like what you said there is right. The other piece I would add, in addition to boundaries, and I would guess that that's probably for the people watching this, that's probably the biggest thing that they run into, is that people plow through their boundaries at a very fast pace, calling at all hours of the day and the night just because they need someone to talk to. It can also become very, those situations can become very intense, maybe even scary, and intimidating of what do I do with that. The other piece really that I would look at is the person teachable. That's part of that. Are they always right? and do they ever listen to your opinion or your wisdom? And certainly those become indicators, but it can become very intense. It can become very intimidating. It can be scary to be like, what do I have to do with this to get this person to stop calling me all the time? My spouse is ticked off about it. I'm mad about it. And we need to come up with some way to handle this. And for that person that's in that situation, it's not ever going to be responded to well. Like as soon as you push back, they're going to push back even harder and probably get angry and maybe even leave the church. Sometimes those are consequences to maintain your sanity in the process.
I think part of the question was, how do you recognize those individuals that are trying to manipulate you into helping, and just recognizing that sometimes helping people can be hurting them depending on the situation. But if they're becoming more dependent on you and less dependent on the Lord, that's a pretty quick way to determine if they're manipulating you.
Wow. Appreciate all of your comments. Well, we are almost at 1 hour. I do want to give one last shot for Aaron or Timmy or Stephanie, just to give anything that maybe came up or you thought that you just want to give a 30-second final statement, and then we'll have John Payne close in prayer. Anything you want to add, any of you three?
Children, we haven't talked much about that, but I see a lot of kids from age 5 up. And so developmentally appropriate, calm conversations, not a monologue. Make sure that they feel reassured. Your volume, your tone, the cadence of how fast you speak, and your body language actually means a lot more than the words you're saying. You want to answer the child's question based on what they're asking, not what you think is important from an adult perspective. So tune into the kids. Help them to know you're safe, we're together, this is going to be an adventure, and this is how we roll, okay? So whether that's a fun family thing, together activities, it's your opportunity to actually model how you face something together. You're actually building resilience in an early age. And I mean, obviously, that's a process or capacity for an outcome of adapting to something, whether it's trauma, adversity, threats. And right now, we're all working on our resilience. And so with God's help and the power person work of the Holy Spirit, we're going to come out better on the other side. But I think sometimes the kids need that extra TLC.
Good.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I would include here, I would just highlight that whatever is being experienced or shared, whether it's fears, anxieties, sadness, depression, if somebody is bringing that to you, it's probably taken them a long time to want to get to that spot where they're recognizing that it's a problem. In a lot of cases, I've seen that to be true. It's not something that they're just going around talking about with their friends or whatever. So if they're extending that out, I would also just highlight that it's legitimate. Most of the time, those fears that are being experienced by people of all ages is legit. And for a lot of people, they don't always know how to express that fear. And so sometimes it comes out sideways, it comes out, some way that makes no sense to anybody but them. But it's their way of trying to process through that fear, that anxiety, that depression. Maybe they have no idea how to deal with that, or how to express that in a way that makes sense. And those are all times to just kind of sit back and say, okay, is this a conversation I can have? And that goes to our earlier question, or is this just to a point where we have to get some additional help and some additional assistance?
I'd say for my closing thought, just to remind people that stress is not always a bad thing. There is good stress. It gears us up and gets us ready for things that require a little bit more energy of us. And I remember someone hearing that you can't turn negative high energy into calm very easily, but you can turn high negative energy into high positive energy. So getting excited about something. So if the person you're speaking with is really stressed, there's a lot of high negative energy, see if you can channel that into, let's get excited about what the Lord is doing and look for opportunities to serve.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists that were here today, to Aaron King and to Timmy Hanks and Stephanie. Thank you so much. I'm going to have John Payne close us in prayer, because I heard a thread through all of this, that it's our dependence on God and the gospel that really is the difference in everyone's life, because we have an eternal life that comes next that we can be living for also. John?
Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. Thank you for the hope that we can offer to others. I pray, Lord, as all of us are going through this together, thank you for what we heard today. What a just helpful thoughts. And Lord, the ability to take the intensity of what we might be sensing in our own lives and turning that into looking for areas to be thankful and ways to be passionate about opportunities, God, where you want to work in this season. And I just pray too for people who are hurting in this season, and for God, us to have eyes to see them as you would see them, and that God, you'd also give us wisdom to know how to come to help, and Lord too, to recognize that we have to be healthy, and we have to be in good rhythms in our own individual, personal, private lives, Lord, in order to be able to help others too. And so I pray that each of the people on this call, Lord, would be doing the rhythms and the things necessary, the rest necessary to go ahead and to be ministered to by you, so that we can minister to others in this season. Thank you, and pray that you just continue to glorify yourself in this season of the church. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.